The morning started like any other, with the sun creeping over the hills of Willow Creek Valley, casting a golden glow on the rows of grapevines I'd spent years coaxing from barren dirt into a thriving vineyard. I'm Ethan Brooks, 28, a guy who turned a patch of forgotten land into Willow Creek Vines, a winery that's become my life's work. 2 years of sweat, calluses, and early mornings had transformed this place into something beautiful, vines stretching across rolling slopes, catching the dawn just right. But that morning, as I was pruning with the kind of rhythm you only get from doing it 1,000 times, sirens shattered the quiet. Red and blue lights flashed at my gate, and my mom, Clara Brooks, was shouting from the porch, "They've got cops out here like we're running a cartel in the dirt." Standing front and center, arms crossed and smirking like she'd just busted a major crime ring, was Helen Carter, president of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association. This wasn't about grapes or noise or some HOA rulebook. This felt personal, like I'd tripped a wire I didn't even know was there. I stood there, shears in hand, torn between laughing at the absurdity and wondering if I should bolt. What would you have done? Let me back up. I built Willow Creek Vines from nothing. When I bought this land in 2023, it was a weed-choked mess nobody wanted. Now, it's a green oasis, with thousands of high-quality vines producing grapes that make damn good wine. My mom, Clara, 60 and sharper than the fine print in any contract, lives with me on the property. She's got this radar for trouble, and that morning, as she poured coffee, she spotted Helen marching up our driveway like she was about to raid a fortress. "Ethan," she called, her voice tight. "There's a woman coming, and she looks like she means business." I set down my shears, half amused, half wary. It was a crisp spring Saturday in 2025, perfect for vineyard work, when Helen Carter first stormed into my life. Helen moved with the precision of someone who thrives on control. She was maybe 50, dressed like she'd just stepped out of a country club, clutching an iPad and a folder stuffed with papers. Her hair was a rigid bob, her makeup applied like she was going to war. When she spoke, her voice had the cold authority of a judge handing down a sentence. "Helen Carter, Pinewood Heights Community Board President," she announced. "We need to address some serious violations here." The way she said serious made it sound like I was running a chop shop, not growing grapes. She claimed my vineyard was disrupting the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood, whatever that meant. I asked for specifics, keeping my tone polite, but her accusations were vague complaints about operations and community character. Honestly, I thought she was joking. Who talks about aesthetic harmony over grapevines? But my calm response seemed to rile her up more. Things got weird when we reached my office. As I invited her in to review my permits, she froze in front of the sign reading Willow Creek Vines. She stared at it like it was a coded message, her face shifting from smug to confused to something almost like fear. "Willow Creek Vines," she muttered, as if the name unlocked some buried memory. I shrugged it off, explaining I'd picked the name for the way the sun sets over the valley's western ridge. But her reaction stuck with me. What did she know that I didn't? She snapped out of it, her mask of authority slipping back into place, and issued a 30-day ultimatum to comply with community standards. I didn't push back, sensing there was more to this than HOA nonsense. After she left, I stood staring at that sign, wondering what nerve I'd hit. I called my lawyer, David Ramsey, a guy who's been untangling my family's legal knots since I was a kid. "David," I said, "someone's playing games, and I don't know the rules." I laid out the bizarre encounter, from Helen's march to her fixation on the sign. David listened quietly, unusual for him, since he's usually interrupting with legal jargon. Then he chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. "Ethan, want me to send a polite letter about property rights?" His tone suggested he knew something I didn't, like he was holding a winning hand. I told him to hold off. Part of me wanted to see how far Helen would take this. Looking back, I wonder if that was a mistake or the start of something brilliant. A week later, Helen returned with reinforcements. She brought 3 HOA members: Greg Thompson, a jittery accountant, a retired librarian named Margaret whose name I caught later, and a guy who said he was a soil engineer. They arrived with gear like they were investigating a hazmat spill: cameras, measuring tapes, even a decibel meter. A decibel meter. For a vineyard quieter than my old pickup truck. Helen barked orders while they scurried around, snapping photos of my irrigation pipes and solar panels. Greg looked uncomfortable, glancing at the tidy rows of vines like he wasn't sure why he was there. Margaret was obsessive, photographing gravel like it was evidence of a crime. The soil engineer tested my pump's noise, which was barely a hum. The whole scene was absurd, like a suburban SWAT team had gotten lost. Helen delivered her verdict like a prosecutor in a courtroom drama. Your irrigation system is causing excessive noise, disturbing residents' peace, she declared, consulting her clipboard like it held state secrets. And your delivery trucks are damaging our shared roads, which we maintain at great expense. The fine is $3,000, increasing daily until you comply. I stared, dumbfounded. $3,000 for growing grapes? Then I overheard Greg whispering to Margaret, I don't see anything wrong here, but Helen said if we don't sign off, she'll audit every house in the neighborhood. Margaret nodded, whispering about her unpermitted patio. That's when it clicked. Helen wasn't just overzealous. She was running a racket, strong-arming neighbors with threats of fines and reviews. It was cunning, unethical, and probably illegal. I kept my cool, asking, You sure your HOA badge covers private farmland, Helen? Her eyes flashed with something desperate, but she snapped, Don't test me, Mr. Brooks. I said nothing, watching her dig her own grave. That night, I got a text from David. Ready when you are. This ends when you say. I looked out over the vineyard, the solar panels glinting under the moon, the hills stretching into the distance. Too soon, I texted back. Get everything ready. I sat on my porch with a glass of last year's Pinot, watching the lights of Pinewood Heights flicker below. Each light was a family Helen had manipulated, decent people caught in her game. Was I being too patient, letting her escalate? Or was I setting up a reckoning she'd never see coming? I wasn't sure if this was justice or payback, but I knew Helen had picked the wrong fight. I decided to fight back, not with lawyers, but with truth. I hand-delivered invitations to an open house at Willow Creek Vines, inviting neighbors to see what your HOA's really upset about. Call it old school or calculated, it was both. 30 families showed up that sunny Sunday, some curious, others expecting the disaster Helen had described. Instead, they found a pristine vineyard, professional equipment, and a solar-powered setup that was quieter than their lawnmowers. A woman who jogged past my gate daily stopped, stunned. I thought this was some messy factory, she admitted to her husband. Helen made it sound like an environmental hazard. Her husband shook his head. She said he was ruining the neighborhood. Halfway through, a man named Paul Evans, a former HOA board member, pulled me aside. Ethan, I signed her complaint because she threatened to sue me over an unpermitted shed, he said quietly. She's got files on everyone, fences, paint colors, you name it. Others chimed in. The soil engineer marveled at my solar system, saying, Helen called this a resource drain, but it's the opposite. Greg, the accountant, apologized, admitting he'd misunderstood my operation. Margaret, the librarian, looked ashamed. She said you were running an illegal business, threatening property values. This is the most professional setup I've seen. By the end, neighbors were asking about grape harvests and wine tastings, saying the vineyard made Pinewood Heights unique. They swapped numbers, talking about investigating Helen's HOA leadership. As I cleaned up, Paul called. 15 families are questioning her now, he said. They're pushing for a special meeting to oust her. I grinned, sipping my wine. Helen's web was unraveling. 3 days later, she doubled down. She called an emergency meeting at the Pinewood Heights Community Center, titled Stop Illegal Commercial Operations. The parking lot was packed with 60 cars, the air thick with tension. Helen had prepared like she was going to trial PowerPoint, handouts, a legal brief on community standards. She stood at a podium, voice dripping with urgency. We face a grave threat to our neighborhood's value, she began, accusing me of stealing electricity from the community grid and dumping chemicals into the groundwater. Her slides showed utility lines near my property, misleadingly framed as evidence of theft. She claimed my vineyard was poisoning the valley's water supply, pure fiction, but scary enough to rile the crowd. Some nodded, alarmed, but the open house attendees weren't buying it. Paul stood up. Helen, where's the evidence? I saw his operation, it's legal and clean. Margaret added, I was at the inspection and the open house. These accusations don't add up. The room turned chaotic, neighbors arguing over what they'd heard versus seen. Helen clapped for attention, flashing a banner of signatures to prove community support. But I saw fear in her eyes. She was losing control. She shouted, "This isn't opinion. It's about protecting our homes," and vowed to call the police for a criminal investigation. Driving home with Mom, I smirked. Tomorrow's gonna be wild. She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. That night, I lay awake, wondering if letting Helen escalate was fair to the neighbors caught in her spiral. But the first punch was coming, and it wasn't mine. At 9 a.m. Monday, April 14th, 2025, sirens echoed across Willow Creek Valley. 2 police cruisers roared up my gravel drive, lights flashing. 4 officers stepped out. Officer Sarah Mitchell, 35, all business, Sergeant Daniel Torres, a veteran who'd seen it all, and 2 younger cops who stayed quiet. Helen stood by a cruiser, clutching her folder, looking like she'd rehearsed this moment. "Officer Mitchell," she declared, pointing at my vines. "This valley belongs to the community, not one man exploiting it." Her accusations were louder, more desperate: electricity theft, chemical dumping, the works. Sarah listened politely, but Daniel's eyes scanned the vineyard, clearly not seeing the crime scene Helen described. "Mr. Brooks," Sarah said, "we've got serious allegations. Can we see your documentation?" I led them to my office, handing over a file box: permits, licenses, solar certifications, water rights, all stamped and legal. Sarah flipped through them, her expression shifting from skeptical to intrigued. "One more thing," I said, pulling out a county property map with a red seal. "This shows the boundaries and ownership of this area." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Mr. Brooks, this changes everything. You're not just a vineyard owner, you own the foundation of this valley." I nodded. "The vineyard's on 2,400 acres, from the Eastern River to Route 12. The entire Pinewood Heights subdivision is built on land leased from my family. I'm their landlord." Silence hit like a thunderclap. Daniel whistled, grabbing his radio. "Control, Unit 10 needs urgent property record verification. We've got a complainant with jurisdictional issues." The dispatcher sounded confused. "Confirm ownership for Pinewood Heights." Sarah clarified, "The complainant's trying to regulate her landlord's private property." The radio crackled with county confirmation. Willow Creek Vines owns the land under the subdivision. Registered owner, Ethan Brooks. Daniel shook his head, grinning. "In 20 years, I've never seen this." Sarah asked to tour the property. "We'll need my Jeep," I said. "This is going to open some eyes." From the hilltop, the valley unfolded like a painting: houses, parks, trails, all on my land. "From the river to Route 12, I said, 2,400 acres, including every home below. Sarah stared, recalculating. "So Helen's been finding her landlord?" I nodded, savoring the moment. "She's been renting from me while trying to shut me down." Daniel laughed. "She's harassing the guy who owns the ground under her house." Sarah radioed for a supervisor, saying, "We've got a tenant threatening her landlord over his own property. We need guidance." The dispatcher, barely hiding laughter, sent Supervisor Collins, ETA 15 minutes. As we drove back, Sarah asked, "How long have you known she was your tenant?" I admitted, since her first visit. Her name was on the lease agreements. I let her go, curious how far she'd take it. Maybe I should have stopped her sooner, but some lessons hit harder this way. Was I patient or petty? I still don't know. Back at the gate, Helen stood with 12 neighbors, expecting her big win. "Officer Mitchell, did you find the violations?" she asked, voice eager. Sarah's face was stone. "Ms. Carter, we've verified records. Pinewood Heights is built on leased land from Mr. Brooks. You're his tenant, and this vineyard's outside HOA jurisdiction." Helen's face collapsed. "No, we own our homes." Sarah softened but stayed firm. "You own the structures, but the land's leased from Mr. Brooks. Your HOA can't regulate his property." I stepped forward. "Helen, as I said, the HOA has no authority here. Leases are up for review next week. Let's all read the fine print this time." Neighbors murmured, pulling out phones to check records. One shouted, "She's been taking orders from our landlord's tenant." Sarah delivered the final blow. "Mr. Brooks, we found no violations. Ms. Carter, next time, check the title before calling us." Daniel added, "You're lucky he's reasonable. I'd be reviewing leases after this." The officers drove off, chuckling. Helen stood frozen, shock and humiliation in her eyes. I thought it was about standards, she whispered, turning away. Neighbors apologized, embarrassed for believing her. Greg said, "We should have asked you first." That night, David called. 6 families want to renew leases early. They know who owns the dirt now. I laughed. Set appointments for next week. Helen picked the wrong fight. Leaning back on my porch, I watched the valley's lights. They weren't just homes, now they were my responsibility. Mom asked, "Regret letting it go this far?" I shook my head. Some lessons only land when people think they know it all, then learn they know nothing. So, here's where I need your take. If you found out your biggest enemy was your tenant, would you drop the hammer right away or let them dig their own grave? Would you stay quiet, holding the power, or make sure everyone knew who's in charge? And here's the real kicker. Is it justice to let someone like Helen crash and burn, or does it make you just as bad if you enjoy watching it happen? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I am dying to hear. If this hit you where it counts, smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.